Today we are going to discuss the Ponziani opening. So Ponziani opening can be like a surprise opening in your repertoire, which you can use occasionally when you need to surprise your opponent or you want to take him out of theoretical lines. So let me show you what the opening is: e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then white plays c3. So c3 is a move that is usually played after bishop c4 or bishop b5. But in Ponziani, we directly play c3. So the idea for white is white wants to play d4 and get a good pawn center as soon as possible, even before developing the bishop. Because you're playing c3 now before the bishop moved, that allows black two options. There are mainly two ways of playing against a Ponziani from the black side. One is a very natural approach, and one is a very aggressive approach. So the natural approach is knight f6. So black just brings out and attacks the pawn. Now you cannot play d3, then there's no point of c3. White goes for d4. That is the correct move. Now black has again options. Black can take on d4. Black can take on e4. These are the two options that I can see, right? Or you can ignore this threat also. So let's consider if black takes this pawn. Then before recapturing, white will push. And now where will the knight move? If the knight moves to e4, queen e2 will almost trap it. Black will have to give up a pawn and then d5. This will be the position which will be slightly advantageous for white. Now, what if he went to knight d5? Then you can just develop your bishop, attack the knight again. Knight has to go back and then just put the bishop back. This also looks like a good position for white. Yes, white has given up a pawn, but it's a good position because his piece is active. If you don't want to give up material, you can just recapture here and still play bishop c4 next move. So white gets a center, it's a good position. Let's go back. So this was what after d4, after c3, knight f6, d4, we considered pawn takes. Then e5 would be good option for white. Black can also take on e4. That is slightly better than taking on d4. Now white has to be precise. Taking here is not ideal because he can just play d6. We can play pawn d5. And after pawn d5, where would this knight move? Let's say knight e7, and then you can recapture this pawn. Now there is a trap here. Many black players will immediately go for d6, developing a piece, attacking the knight. But can you find out what happens then? Bishop b5 wins a piece. Because now bishop d7, you get a piece, and if c6, then we just take. If pawn takes, we just take knight takes c6. And if knight takes, bishop takes wins a rook. And if queen b6, for example, then we can just play knight d4, check, bishop d7, takes, and just castle and have a good position. This should be a good position for white, right? Is there any better option instead of knight d4? No, knight d4 looks like the best option. Knight e7, king e7 is also there. Knight e7, he can play queen b5 though. King e7 will be good for white. He can play queen b5 and the game goes on. So the position will be good for you. So just to revise, after c3, knight f6, the natural response. d4, black has two options. And if pawn takes pawn, you push e5. And if knight takes pawn, you push d5. And you get back your pawn with a good position. Now, let's see the aggressive option for black. After c3, the disadvantage of c3 is you're not controlling the d5 square, which you normally do by knight c3 or bishop c4. That means black can strike at the center with d5. Now, if black goes for this approach, then white has to be very precise. If you take back, then this becomes good for black. The queen cannot be challenged by any piece. So it's a good square for the queen. So we do not want that. White has to play queen a4 or bishop b5. So bishop b5, black can take here and the game goes on. Black might get a slight edge. And after d5, queen a4 is the main response. The queen keeps an eye on the e4 pawn as well. So you're not even losing a pawn. Now, black can choose to defend this e5 pawn. This is a threat by playing f6 or queen d6. Both options are good. Bishop d6 you cannot play because the pawn takes. So queen d6 is the best move because that would defend the pawn and the knight would still be defended. And pawn f6 is also possible. So that's how the game may continue. And after queen a4, one line to consider is black may go for this gambit, bishop d7. And after bishop d7, now white would take, black goes knight d4, attacking the queen and attacking the knight. So queen d1 is best there. And the game goes on like knight takes knight, queen takes back. It's roughly equal. Black has some active pieces and white queen is already out early. White has not developed any piece. So yeah, this is roughly an equal position. So these are the ideas and concepts that you need to understand to play the Ponziani opening. It is not a mainstream opening, but it can be quite a surprise to your opponent, and they may fall for traps and lose the game by losing the sender. So the opening is just about the sender. This opening is just about the sender, and it can be used to surprise your opponents.